Hey everyone, welcome to day 2 of Metatopia, the 3 o'clock panel. Welcome to getting your first RPG published. I'm going to be the moderator. My name is Jonathan Lavallee. I'm a game designer for 17 years. Published recent game I'm working on is We Used to Be Friends. And I'll let all our panelists introduce themselves. April.
Hi, I'm April Walsh. I'm the designer of the Thirsty Sword Lesbians RPG, which is kickstarting on right now for another couple of days. So head on over to swordlesbians.com if you are interested in telling stories that celebrate queer people and queer joy in any setting where swords cross and hearts race. You can also find it at sword.gay. I am Gay Spaceship Games. You can find me at Gay Spaceship on Twitter and Gay Spaceship GMS on Twitter. When I'm not designing RPGs, I'm a civil liberties attorney at a nonprofit fighting for your rights, trying to save this world. So, sword lesbian, sword lesbian, all of the above.
Awesome. Okay, Darren, please.
Hi, my name is Darren Watts. I used to own or co-own Hero Games and Indie Press Revolution. I got out of the owning things business about 10 years ago now and work primarily freelance for. I've worked for Star Trek and Doctor Who, and I'm currently working mostly for Greater Than Games on the Sentinels of the Universe, Sentinels of the Multiverse comic books role-playing game. I also run the Explain This Comics Guys podcast, and I am a founder of Metatopia and ran the panel and seminar track. So I put myself on this one because it sounded like fun. So
awesome. Okay, Moe, please.
My name is Moe. I'm from Oakland. I'm a recovered hero gamer, and my penance is I'm designing games now. Just released Shibuya Nights, a anime steampunk fantasy RPG built on the Forge in the Dark mechanics. And yeah, happy to be here.
Awesome. And Jason.
Hi, I'm Jason Walters. I'm the current general manager of Indie Press Revolution and Hero Games, with Indie Press Revolution being a specialty distributor of small press role-playing games.
Awesome. All right. So we're going to jump right into just some discussion. And the first thing we wanted to talk about is before you even get your game published, we're going to talk a little bit about playtesting and just how important it is to make sure that your game is doing what you want it to do. So April, what's one of the biggest challenges you find with getting the game to do what you want it to do through playtesting?
I think there are a few different phases of playtesting that are really important, right? So I'll start with, as soon as I have something that can get on the table, I'm going to bring it to the table with like my friends group, right? Like my go-to people. And that's really helpful, sort of like a shakedown of the mechanics. But then taking it to a wider audience always reveals more ways that people can approach the mechanics and use it to tell stories. So my games are very feelings and relationship oriented. And so, you know, it's not enough that it sort of works if everyone is already on the same page. I play test for sort of getting people on the same page and steering them in the right direction. And when two people go at each other saying, well, how do we figure out who's better at swords? Then they realize that's not what the game is for. And 30 seconds later, one of them is screaming at the other, like, the reason none of your relationships last is because you're still in love with the pirate queen and she doesn't love you back. And I'm like, good, that's working as intended. It's steering people like into the kinds of stories and dramatic beats that I want. So it's sort of an ongoing process, but I think it's pretty important to reach as broad a group as you can. Even outside of what may be your core target audience, like who is going to be at the table with the people who are your core audience and what experiences are being shaped there. So especially, getting other people to run it is really important to see, how it plays when you're not there to make it happen. And then being able to observe other folks playing is really helpful. So everyone who streamed the game while it was in the various playtest phases was doing a great service to making the game better.
So Moe, to throw a question to you, for you, when did you think your game was done and ready to get into that published state?
I don't like this question because I was wrong.
These are well equipped to answer it.
So I thought I was ready last summer. I had lots of very successful play tests. I had a couple other GMs running my game who came back with great questions that I felt like I was resolving. And I had pretty much written the entire game. And I then started laying out the book and realized there were some holes. And so those holes presented certain questions, and some of those questions were mechanical. And so we spent a couple months going back in and making sure that things were working. One of the things I really liked was having a lot of mechanics that weren't necessarily combat oriented to resolve issues. And yeah, some of the feedback I was getting was, this works in combat, but it doesn't work if I'm just trying to deceive someone. And so, yeah, we fixed that before we went to print.
Well, you see, I think that speaks to a good point, right? It speaks to a point of there's never a point where you should be afraid to go, oh, we need to go back and go back a step, right? That you're thinking at that publishing point, you're like, no, wait, we need to take this back and be okay with that to have it be a better product at the end.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
This is my first game. I didn't want to, be out there half embarrassed for it. So.
Right. And I'll throw this because this is a very important question. It's something that we wanted to bring up too. So Darren, I'm going to throw a question at you. What was a big pitfall you've seen a lot of first-time publishers do with their playtesting?
Specifically with their playtesting, they don't compartmentalize what it is they're doing. Right? There's a tendency to kind of like say, okay, if I just put this on the table and see how it goes, and then react to that, that's all I need to do for playtesting, right? And the most successful playtesters that I've seen, people who have done it for a long time, when they sit down at the table, they have a goal in mind for that specific session. Right, we are playtesting this small portion of my game, right? And to make sure that your players understand that so that they can provide useful feedback to that and not wander away from the thing that you're trying to do, right? I've had playtest sessions where the players were having an absolute ball with the game, right? And everybody was having fun, and it seemed like it would be wildly successful, except the game designer did not get the crucial piece of information that they had sat down to get that day, right? It's like, oh, I'm delighted everything else works, but I still haven't solved character creation or whatever the thing that I wanted to work on that day. So being able to kind of like compartmentalize the process and recognizing where you are in that process and what needs testing today, I think is a skill that every designer needs to develop in managing their playtests for every game that they do. Is just know where you are and what you're doing that day, and not just kind of like leave it broadly open to, hey, did you like it? I mean, that's a terrible question to ask somebody for in a playtest. It's a waste of everybody's time. So
right. And Jason, I'm going to ask you a question about playtesting too. Oh, sorry, Mo, you had a comment. If you wanted to just pop in before I ask another question.
Yeah, I was really fortunate. I fell in to a gaming group that I wasn't looking for, but that are constantly trying off weird, quirky stuff that, happens to be like, pretty innovative design stuff. So I got a lot of feedback that at first I didn't necessarily understand, but definitely made the game better.
Awesome. So Jason, I'm going to ask you as again, I know Hero Games, but this kind of realm of IPR is, when people come to you and say, hey, can you distribute this game? And you see it, right? How easy is it for you to tell how much playtesting something has gone into something, right? When you see it?
It's pretty easy, actually. So there's a few warning signs when you're a distributor. All right, I want to be very general because I don't want to insult any creative people.
We're saying it's okay. You can't handle it.
That's fine. I'm a big man. I can handle it. Hit me.
Sometimes people come to you and say, hey, I've been working for 25 years on this game. And that's an immediate warning sign. Mm-hmm. Another one is, I have solved the problems with Dungeons and Dragons. And this is my game. That's another warning sign. Oh boy, there's a lot.
Throw one more at us. Throw it at us. Move on to the next one.
Okay.
The biggest one for you. The biggest one for you that you see that isn't kind of like isn't like these other games suck and mine is better, right? Like, but other than that, like, what's the big thing you look at and go, no, you need to take this back to the drawing board?
I like to see things that aren't highly derivative. I get a lot of things submitted that I have to turn down, but they don't seem unique and special. You know, they don't seem like they have anything that really makes them stand out design-wise from anything else I've seen before. When I say a lot, I don't mean like hundreds. I mean, you know, a few dozen a year. IPR is pretty welcoming and accepting to most work. We take most things in. But yeah, you get a certain number of things. They're kind of derivative. They're an attempt to solve problems that don't exist. Things like that. Well, I don't mean with Dungeons and Dragons. There's a lot of problems that exist. That's not
we
what I
make
mean.
fun. We make fun of designers who do things like, as Jason says, of like, you know, this here is my game. It's D&D, but I fixed initiative, right? Like that's the thing that I've always
There's
hated,
a lot of
right?
that.
There's a lot of that, and we make fun of that, but really, we shouldn't, because every designer needs to go through that, right? Like every designer's first design usually is, I am dissatisfied with an aspect of the game. And maybe it wasn't D&D. Maybe it's I'm dissatisfied with Fate, or I'm dissatisfied with Powered by the Apocalypse, or whatever. And I have designed a thing to fix the thing that bothers me about it that I'm not satisfied with, right? That's a useful exercise for every designer. Most of those shouldn't get published. Right? That's a separate question. But what that serves for a young designer on their path to becoming a designer is a really valuable step that we really shouldn't mock, because it's a key thing to learn, to be able to compartmentalize rules and to be able to say, you know what, I like everything about D&D except this, and this is why I don't like it. That's a skill, right? To be able to say that. You're going to use that skill later on when you're actually designing something new and useful and important. So yeah, you probably shouldn't publish that, but you should always do it, right?
So I'm gonna hop in just now. Right, just to move on to the next topic, just because we've hit this for a little bit of topic. I do want to say though, just to comment on that, Indie Beef has created more games than I would like to have.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
But now that you've play tested it, so you've play tested the game now, you have got to where you think it is, you may have even taken a step back and come back. Let's talk about how you get it to the next level. So the first part we're going to look at is, how do you work with another publisher? We're not going to talk about pitching. There's a lot of great panels on pitching that you can look at on the Twitch stream or recorded. We're going to assume you've pitched, it's been beautiful, you've been accepted. So April working on Thirsty Sword Lesbians, working with Evil Hat. What does that look like when you work with a publisher?
Yeah. So I wasn't sure whether I wanted to partner with a publisher or not. But I had released the game on itch in beta, and people got excited about it, and Evil Hat got excited about it. And so in talking with them, I was making sure that our goals were aligned, right? So we are trying to reach a queer audience. We are prioritizing a queer audience. And in part, it was a matter of sort of getting comfortable that this would be a place that would be excited about the kind of game and stories that I wanted to tell. And they said all the right things, and then we signed a contract, and then they did everything that they said they would do, and I was very relieved about it, because I knew that their intentions were good, but that doesn't always translate into good execution. So for me, what that meant was negotiating things like having a little bit more of a hand in art direction than a game designer necessarily does usually. We brought in two different sensitivity consultants, but basically I have a day job. I would not have published an RPG, at least not for another few years, if I weren't partnering with a publisher who knows how to do all the other stuff that's on the agenda to talk about this panel, like layout and printing things and distributing them and like price it. Basically, like Evil Hat will send me like, here's what we think the pricing and stuff for the Kickstarter should be, and I'll be like, make that number 69, and that's my contribution to like the economic side of things. So it's just really been helpful, right? Like I have a cool game, and then they have all this knowledge and experience, as well as like connections to artists and sensitivity readers and experience doing Kickstarters, right? I haven't done a Kickstarter before, but we're doing one, and it's taking off wildly. So it's something I couldn't have done on my own. I could make like a cool game and print it and reach some people. But it's been really rewarding. I fortunately don't have a horror story. I have a success story to tell about working with a publisher. And I talked to a lot of people for advice as well. And some people were like, "Oh, you publish it yourself, you'll like make more money for yourself that way." Because like publishers carry overhead with them. Like I really won't, because I just won't do it. Right? It's not going to happen. If I'm not partnering with people who like know how to do this, and someone who's going to be my project manager and make sure that like I work on it regularly, then something is always going to be more of a crisis that I'm going to be dealing with instead. So that's most of my thoughts on working with a publisher. Honestly, it's been great for me.
Right. So Jason, as the other side, as someone who is, Hero Games, and as I think the really big publisher still in this conversation, what are you looking for when a first-time designer comes to you with a game, right? Like, or comes to you with an idea, even if it's to pitch something in Hero or something like that. Like, what are you looking for as a publisher?
Well, a complete manuscript that requires minimal editing is always nice.
Right.
Okay, so beyond pipe dreams.
It's good if it's something innovative that hasn't been done before, and a lot's been done with Hero. So, for example, when we did Champions Now, Ron Edwards came with a pretty interesting suggestion to us, which was, I want to go back before the Hero system, back to the roots of Champions in the 80s, and then the sort of grandfather of indie games, which Ron basically is, I want to update it for modern sensibilities as kind of more of a narrativist game. So that was an interesting suggestion, so we went ahead with that. So, and I also knew that Ron was capable of turning in a mostly edited, mostly complete game with a lot of play testing. So almost no one can turn in a completely edited game.
Yeah. So just to kind of sum that up for new people, you're probably looking at making sure you've done the work, right? Making sure you've done the play testing, making sure you've taken the time. Yeah, right, exactly. To make sure you've done that kind of groundwork to show that you're like, hey, I look at all what I've done. I need your help to carry it over the line.
Right. Also, generally speaking, a publisher wants to do, they have minimum time, and they want to do a minimum amount of work on your manuscript, on your game. They want it to be pretty much done. I'm not talking about, obviously not layout, graphics, art, cover art, that sort of thing. But as a manuscript, as a finished game, they want it done. Almost.
Almost. Okay, so I'm going to just transition over here to the doing it yourself conversation just a little bit. And Mo, I'm going to bring you in here because we're going to talk about like, what's it like having to learn design? Like, because we didn't talk about your background, so I don't know if you have a design background, but
Nope.
shaking of that. How is that as a first-time designer coming to it? Like, what is that like for art and layout and cover art, all that kind of the manufacturing of the product?
So I'm fortunate that I've made some films before, and so I have a sense of the market wants to see a thing. I've never delivered a film that the market wanted to see, but I get that there are boundaries. So before doing my Kickstarter, I had to go and scrap my lunch money and get some art so that the Kickstarter looked like a real thing. And I had live plays. I had already kind of played over some live streams, and I'd done some of the groundwork to really kind of just build some energy around the game. After the Kickstarter, which was successful, fortunately, I knew a guy. I knew a guy who did some corporate layout design, and I reached out to him, and he said, "Sure, I could do this in a weekend." And what he turned around didn't look like a game, So it was really suddenly, I had got my Kickstarter funds. I was ready to spend some money, and I thought I had a team, and my team wasn't there. So, I'm also art directing at the same time. Fortunately, I had a very clear vision of what this project should look like art-wise, and I was fortunate to stumble upon some great artists. But I ended up reaching out and getting a referral for a designer who made the game look amazing. I'm so happy with how it came out, and it sounds ridiculous because I'm a game designer, but it looks like a real game.
I know what you mean.
Totally.
It's always a surprise when
Somebody hands you that the first time, right? Yeah.
right when people show up and like add value to what you've done, like that's how it's supposed to be. And you work with enough people, after a while, you realize it's not guaranteed to be like that. So, I really kind of lucked out on that. And then, there were several rounds of editors because the thing I've read again and again and again is how nobody wants to buy something that has typos. People want things that make mechanical sense. It can't say one thing in this chapter and then say another thing in this chapter. And my problem is I was writing this game, at my weekends and evenings when I wasn't trying to keep my wife married and raise my kid. I had written this game over 2 years. So mechanics had changed, things had changed, was this the right draft we're even starting from? So, editing was a long, arduous process. I think I ended up going through 3 editors in total, and couple people who've read it before I went to print said, it all makes sense and coheres, and so I'm grateful. But there's a lot of work that goes into what that publisher's doing, and count yourself lucky, people.
Well, so Darren, to ask you that question,
Can you imagine like your first art director is Fred Hicks? That's a wonderful place to start from in the industry,
that's a good
right?
place to start from.
Seriously, man,
Yeah.
I'm tremendously jealous.
We're working with Trivia Fox, and they're amazing.
Yep,
But Fred's
also,
a layout wizard, and that's great.
Right.
And also, I went into it thinking like, I'm a good writer. I write for a living. It's not going to need that much editing. And then I look at an edit. I'm like, why did she change that? I go to the dictionary, and I'm like, oh, my usage is archaic. I write like a lawyer.
Right, like a lawyer. Yeah. Whither therefore we shall go forth.
Oh my god! I
Right.
should write that as a parody game. Yeah.
Right.
Totally.
Right. Darren, if it helps, your video did freeze. So if you want to go flip to the,
Am I frozen again?
you're
All right.
frozen again. That's fine. So I'm going to throw this to you, question-wise, for you, Darren. That so what's the most important project management skill you need to learn if you're doing this yourself? Because there's a lot of them.
There's a lot of them, right? Yeah. The most important skill I need for to do this myself. The first skill is like don't do all this yourself, right? I mean, there's no. I don't think there's a person in the industry who is sufficiently skilled in every possible, kind of like manifestation of the problem that you might come across, right? There are some people who have an astonishingly broad set of skills. But even their games, like you can tell, maybe this one thing could, might have like benefited from having somebody else involved, right? So there's you have to manage a team, right? Like almost no game comes together without a team being involved, and so the most important part of it is making sure those people are interacting usefully. Right, and everybody understands kind of like what their part is, what they're responsible for, at least a general sense of when it's expected to be done, and how it comes together. Somebody's got to manage that process, and it usually winds up being the publisher. So I know, yeah, I turned it off because I was frozen.
All right, Mo, go ahead. So you want to add on to that?
And part of that skill is knowing when people have given as much as they can give, and you got to kind of move on and find more people to fill in the ranks, because a lot of people aren't doing this for the money. And sometimes you can afford professionals and sometimes you can't. And a lot of people show up with the best intentions of, helping. And then you set standards to what help looks like. And they're like, oh, well, that sounds like work. And well, you're trying to come out with like a professional product.
Right.
Right. And so one of the things, Jason, sorry, you were going to say something. Go ahead. We got some time, so I'm looking at the clock.
I would say the one exception to what Darren said is Avery Alder, who can in fact make an entire game and send it to you completely,
start
all
to
of it.
finish. Right, start to finish.
Start to finish.
Not a bad call. Not a bad call. Yeah.
Right. Truth. Okay. So one of the other things that's come up, and it's been, again, I've been around for a long time, and this is one of the things that has been a more recent development in like 5 years, not like today. But we're talking about sensitivity consults, right? Getting someone who is not you, and particularly if you are a straight white dude, and he says, as he like does vogues around a little bit. So what, April, looking at that, like, how important is that for your manuscript?
I think it's really important. I think the timing is something that's important to get right, in the sense that you want to have enough that your sensitivity consultant is going to be able to like see what you're doing and how you're implementing it. But you want to be early enough in the stage that if you get fundamental feedback that something needs to change, you're able to do that without it having a negative impact on other contingent deadlines that have already come up. So I've been through it once, and sort of navigating it. Definitely, after the sensitivity consult, I was lucky enough to be able to go back and be like, I'm thinking about this for the art. Does that sound good? Or like,
right.
Would you be willing to send me some references for like pre-colonial Filipinx, attire that our scoundrel can wear? And that's not something that I could do. And particularly, I think there's a level that a sensitivity reader can do, making sure that you're not doing harm fundamentally with the content of the game, and also that the experience of reading the game doesn't make somebody tense up, right? So like maybe you implemented it right in the end, but you're taking on a topic that is often done wrong. So how do you make sure you do not trigger the concern at the start so that the experience of reading it is welcoming? And then I think there's an amount of sensitivity reader can do, and then there's a point at which you have to include people other than yourself if you want your game to be as diverse and welcoming as possible, right? Like I can't write about all aspects of the queer experience, but we have 5 contributing authors in the core book, and then more for stretch goals. So have wound up being able to cover a lot of ground, and I couldn't do that even with a sensitivity reader. So if I wanted to write about Heian period Japan and say the historical records that we have erase women, and here's like my imagination of what like queer sapphic love in Heian period Japan might be, a sensitivity reader is probably not a powerful enough tool to make that like something that I could write.
Right.
Yeah, I need to go to somebody with different experiences and connections to different cultures to do that.
Sure.
Right, and in particular, I think with how important it is to not only reach the audience, but reach the audience in a way that they feel good. Like you said, going back to your point about not having them go when they see the topic, even, let alone even before they crack open the book, right? Like that kind of thing is important to make sure to be able to reach the audience and have people play your game. Just going to put it out there. Did anyone else have anything they want to add on? Mo, go ahead.
So my game, Shibuya Nights, is set in a fantasy city called Shibuya, which looks a lot like modern day Tokyo. And I got some really good feedback from sensitivity readers who, I brought it to the process because, I don't want to step on anybody's toes. I've had my toes stepped on having paid for a game or movie or whatever, taxes. And, you have this point where, you're like, all right, I don't want to be the bad person in this, so let's start off right. And I lived in Tokyo for a couple years. By no means am I an expert in Tokyo. I got to the point where I found some people who were really comfortable once they understood I was trying to remix a modern urban setting, that Tokyo is today. It was till a couple years ago the largest city in the world. So if you're going to do like an urban setting, there's almost no more urban than Tokyo. But leaning away from samurai and kind of traditional depictions of religion, and leaning more into the type of stuff that you're going to see in anime, which is a lot more broad. My kid is a Ninjago fan, whatever that means. I'm like, this is weird. But yeah, so just doing something that was much more a mashup, much more San Francisco from Big Hero 6, and much less, this is feudal someplace that I've never been and I'm not steeped in the culture of.
Yeah, I think. Sorry, Jason, you wanted to say something. Go ahead.
Oh no, when Mo's done. Are you
he
done?
muted.
Mo?
He's done. Yeah.
Okay. I have one of these projects right now that's been extremely kind of problematic, which is I've had somebody turn in an absolutely detailed and complete 6th edition version of Western Hero, with the genre is the Old West, and 99% done. And I love the Western genre. I live in a small Western town of 200 people in the Old West, basically. I love the genre. I know a lot about the genre. I've been going through it and making changes. I wrote my own introduction for it. But some genres are just difficult. There is a reading of the Old West where it's this wonderful action-packed genre that anyone can participate in, and then there's the reading of the Old West that it's a race war. And I'm still editing it and thinking about it, and editing it, thinking about it, and figuring out how what I want to do with it. So yeah, what everybody else said, very important, also tricky sometimes.
Right. So
I wanted to make a point for what. I'm sorry.
Okay, so I was going to make a quick joke. Go to Jason and then April. Okay, it's my joke is this bag. Why is it attached to this baggage? What is going on here? What is happening?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I know.
Darren and then April.
April made a point of saying that like part of what was beneficial about their process was that they were able to kind of like bring the different writers and people together as part of that project, everybody with a common goal in mind and sharing that information about each other's purpose. I had the benefit of working on Chris Spivey's Haunted West, which another book that is kind of like absolutely upfront wrestling with the problematic nature of the Western as a as a genre for it. And the piece that I was contributing to it was Mexico of the Old West, right? Like my piece of it was set there. And before we even got very far into writing it, we managed to have, like put a bunch of people's heads together to discuss, like what each others were doing and like the individual problems they had, and being able to take those problems on as a group is an enormous benefit, right? Like I don't think it's very difficult to do a sensitivity read of something by yourself, I guess is kind of like the point I'm trying to get across, right? Like that should always be kind of like a group chore for everybody, to make that right.
Oh, I'm not.
Yeah.
You are. No, I know you're not.
doing
That's
it
my
right.
point. I just wanted to kind of like underline that, right? Like you can't, and it's a nightmare to bring it, even if you have one, to say I have one other sensitivity reader for that. That's an enormous amount of like effort to put on one person's shoulders, right? Like hopefully you've got multiple people who can take a look at this and they can talk to each other about it. So.
Yeah, I wanted to add something about bringing in contributing authors as well. Which is, the very genesis of the idea would be like, gee, it would be cool to get a take on like this historical setting where people used swords. And like, I don't have a connection to that culture, but we could find someone who did. And before like making the pitch, that sort of evolved into like, well, why don't we just see what like people with diverse experiences of queerness and diverse backgrounds in other dimensions feel like pitching that seems to resonate with like this core concept, right? So it's not like I have my vision of what you should write. It's like, I like what you write, and I know that you have experiences that I don't have that I want to be able to represent and be welcoming of. So like, what are you going to pitch? And we got stuff that's like just incredibly creative. We got a coffee house that's magically linked to another fantasy world, and you're facing gentrification here and you're facing invaders there, and like that's charming and delightful and like also very fanficky because coffee shop AUs are just treasures. So I just want to throw that out as a way of interacting with contributing authors that really is like being excited about what they're going to bring to it, right? Like you're not going to lose out on somebody's background by giving them more freedom to pitch what they want to talk about instead of saying, you know, I want you to write this thing that I think you know about because of your ethnicity or something. So it's been great.
Awesome. Okay, I'm going to move us on just because we got some more topics and we want to save some time for questions. We're going to try to mash this together about printing, distribution, and sales and marketing. So we're going to kind of try to lump that together. Mo, talking to you with printing, because you recently got your book printed. So I'm assuming what are some pitfalls and what are some challenges you ran into trying to get your book in a paper format?
I was very fortunate because my designer, Ruben, his email is saves versus DM.
I know Ruben. Ruben's great. Ruben's good people.
Yeah. Awesome. He has done this rodeo before, so he delivered me a file that worked. And you really want to find someone who has done this before, or you really want to just block out some time to invent the wheel. Like those are really your options because, I went through drive-through and because with COVID coming out this year, I'm like, I really want this to be out in the world. In California, everything was closed down in Los Angeles. So it's like, I'm not getting together with my friends, opening a book, but I'm hearing that people on the East Coast are, and that sounds awesome. So, and who knows what's coming in the winter. So I may do a offset print run down the road, but I wanted to fulfill my backers. I wanted to get this out in the world. People have been excited about it and, in touch with me saying they're waiting for it. So I did a relatively small print run and getting it out there. My distributor over there, he he has some books, I have some books. If you need some books, let me know.
Yeah, right. Yes. All right. So Jason, going into that comment then, so we may come back to like what that looks like to find a publisher, find a printer and all that kind of stuff. But what does distribution look like for a first time RPG kind of publisher, or even if you self-publish or with someone?
Well, you have when we should define what we mean by distribution. So if you mean distribution in the sense of you supply books to a place and they get it into stores plus some other things, you're kind of looking at us or Studio 2, really.
Right.
Fundamentally, you're looking at one of the two of us for a first-time, role-playing game publisher. But there are other options. I mean, there's a lot of excellent print-on-demand options, for example. You can have things not only available electronically on DriveThruRPG, but they'll print them physically. You can take the exact same file that you use for DriveThruRPG. You can purchase an ISBN and a barcode and make it available through Lightning Source and feed it into Amazon and Barnes & Noble online and potentially into bookstores as well. So there's a lot of different ways to distribute for a first-time publisher. I don't know as much about itch.io as I should. My two assistants here at IPR who are 17 and 21 respectively, spend all of their time there. IPR is kind of the old person distributor thing as far as they're concerned.
There are 2 or 3 Metatopia panels on literally about introducing itch.io and things like that to you, especially if you're old folks like us. Right?
So,
Or,
Jason, let's talk about that traditional one, and then we'll go to April, because April talked about having having her game on itch and that. So, we can go to that topic next. So, what first time publisher? I want this book in a game store, my friend. What does this look like?
All right. So I'm not going to speak for Jim over at Studio 2. I'll just speak for us strictly, because I'm not sure precisely what Jim's business arrangements are. Okay. So you would come to us. You'd send me either a physical or electronic copy. You'd give basically your elevator pitch by email usually, or people sometimes ask me to call them on the phone, and we have a phone conversation about it. They give me a brief pitch. Based on that, I say, okay, I'd like to have a look. Send me it physically or send me it electronically is usually fine. I or one of my assistants have a look at it and decide whether it's suitable. Then we usually request a certain amount. Now, that amount can be as little as 50 copies. It can be as high as 2,000 copies. Generally, these days, I ask for 1 to 200 physical copies of something. And that's what I'm looking to move in a year, really. What I think I can move in a year. Now, sometimes I'm disappointed, and so is the publisher. Sometimes I'm really underestimating. That's happened too, where I go, "Wow, I could sell 1,000 of these," and then I go back and say, "Do you have more? Did you print more? Can you get more printed?" Do you want me to go into the finances of it?
Yeah, just quickly, just.
Okay.
I mean, you don't necessarily go percentages, but what does that look like financially?
So we're a consignment house. So we don't actually buy anything. People consign us things in lots of anywhere from 50 to 2,000. We pay out quarterly on a percentage basis, depending on whether it's sold to a retailer, direct to customer, at a convention, electronically, and so forth. And of course, the margins involved. We try to keep the margin as high as we can for the publisher in all of this, but especially when selling to retailers, because that's the tricky part. Because the retailer has to make their money, the distributor has to make their money, and then that can sometimes leave you, the publisher, very pinched on the bottom end. So we try to keep that number high. I'll point out, in all fairness to Amazon advantages basic payment to publishers is not terrible. All things considered, it's not bad. You still have to pay to ship to them, and that has to be factored in, things like that. And their system's complicated. So complicated, most role-playing game book publishers prefer to go through some place that does that work for them, because it's a very complicated shipping system. But they're not bad. So there's a lot of options.
Awesome.
And some of the new programs that they have there are actually pretty friendly, which is a nice change. So.
I'm more referring to the back end of it, which hopefully none of you will ever learn about. There's there's a lot that goes into them being willing to take a box of books.
Right.
Awesome. So April, let's talk about itch a little bit, because it is a very huge platform for games coming up, and it's I refuse to use the term the new hotness, even though I just did. So what is your experience like being a publisher on itch?
So I haven't published on DriveThruRPG. I've used DriveThruRPG, and from that perspective, I'm honestly not sure what's baffling about itch, right? Like, it's a different platform where you can upload stuff and they take a cut and then they pay you, right? So, like, I'm not sure why it's confusing. The things that seem to be unique are you get to slide what fraction of the sale price itch takes as their cut. And then people have figured out ways to do neat things like community copies. There's the sort of pay what you want model where itch's interface encourages tipping, and that's cool. So there may be some of that, just like this is not a sort of archetypical economic interaction where, like, I have this commodity and you're going to give me this money and then we don't care about each other. It sort of has some subtle ways of fostering the idea that, like, there are human beings on both sides of this. And that's neat. It's always nice to get a tip, I've set a price and someone wants to pay me more, or it's pay what you want and people do, right? Like that's neat. And it feels good to be able to do that to support people as well. And then I think, culturally, there's a lot of fun, queer, experimental stuff that winds up on itch. I don't know that Drive-Thru-RPG has like a video games or visual novels section to it, and itch does, right?
No,
Itch is sort of like a one-stop shop for indie games that you can print or that you can play on your computer. So it's been a neat experience. I did want physical copies of my first game, End of the Line, which is Descended from the Queen game, where you're the crew of a sentient vessel on the way to being scrapped. And at the end, you'll be asked if you say goodbye. And so what I did was I found a place where you can order cards printed with your specifications, and made sure that there's like a high quality file that you get with the itch download that you can just send right over to them and get that printed. And it's on my list to one day set up with one of the services that will pay you a commission when someone buys your thing and then print it and ship it to them. But this is what happens when I don't have a publisher, is that's on the back burner for a year or more, and while I work on other stuff.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is let Mo comment, and then Jason, sure, if you got a quick one, and then we'll open to see if there's any questions from the chat.
I have a question for April. How much time did you really spend interacting with your community on itch?
Itch wasn't the place where I did the interaction, right? So I could see people interacting there, but Twitter and Discord are the places where I do the most interaction with the community. So I am aware that there are forums and comments and everything, and I do send updates to people who have bought it, because people who bought the old ugly alpha version of Thirsty Sword Lesbians are getting all the versions up to the very pretty final PDF. So I do updates, but I'm not active in the forums on itch. That's not the place where I'm having those conversations.
Jason, you had a...
Oh, I just wanted to tell April that Mo and I have also been bitten by the Descended from the Queen bug. we both have our own Descended from the Queen card games we've been designing.
Nice. Nice.
Well.
Yeah. I got to play it with Alex before it had a name, and then sort of held on to my hack of it would be rude to release this before For the Queen is out. So it just sort of sat on that for a while, and then got it out there.
Awesome.
But it's great.
Okay,
it's amazing how a simple concept can make such a different experience at the table.
Are you ready for questions from the chat?
I think we're ready for questions from the chat.
All right, great. So Genesis of Legend asks, how would you recommend that a new designer proceed with their first game? Publishing for free to gain an audience, or for a price to gather financial resources to support their work?
All right, so Mo, go ahead, take that one.
I feel like I did it, I'd say, not as well as I could have. And I do wish I had a freemium, quick start copy out there. During my my Kickstarter, Root came out with theirs, and I mean, it was beautiful. And you saw this 26-page game with character sheets and everything, and you're like, of course I'm giving you money, and I think there's just really an opportunity to play test, to work out kinks, to build brand. And I wish I was on itch and drive-through with that long before I even did my crowdsourcing.
I'm going to caution people, though, is don't compare yourself to Magpie. Don't be like, hey, there's this really successful publisher that did this quick Kickstarter. Why doesn't mine look like that?
But
perhaps, yeah.
But their quick start was beautiful and amazing and thorough. And I'm like,
sure.
Not looking at the board game, which came before. They already had brand. They have money to throw behind marketing. But I'm like, it's good.
It's still a good idea to try to do it, yes. But also, you're not going to have that kind of money to started something like that, or the Sentinels Kickstarter, Quick Start thing that came out, was also pretty much funded by an enormously successful board game before they could do that, right? He's right. Don't kill yourself, or don't knock yourself for not being able to do something like that. But learn from what they did, right? It's worth their time to do it. It's probably worth your time to do it as well.
All right, anyone else want to hop on that one, or are we going to go to the next question? Jason.
If I may. Exactly what they've said, followed quickly by a very well thought out and planned crowdfunding project. So first the promo version, then follow it quickly with a very well thought out, financially thought out crowdfunding project.
Right.
Okay, do we have another question?
The next question, this popped up when we were talking about editing. How does the process of cutting a feature go for you? From Why Contain It?
All right.
A feature film?
I think we're talking
No.
about cutting maybe things from your game. I hope.
Yeah, like a
This
mechanic,
rule goes-
right? So,
Yeah.
so before there was a public beta, there was a monstrous hydra of a set of rules that, like, I know this is too much, but I want to see what people reach for and like what works best. And so, like, when you go into that, it's very easy to sort of like cut something that you love. Otherwise, if I'm cutting something, it's generally, I haven't had the experience of being like really attached to a feature and then needing to cut it. It's basically like, oh, thank goodness I can get rid of that and like make things leaner and simpler and more accessible. That's just my personal feeling about it.
Yeah, the other thing I would say to that
takes
too.
us back to the playtesting question, right? I mean, this is what that process is for, is to find out what pieces like work, what pieces don't work, and that sort of thing. So I mean, a successful playtest will point you right at what needs to either go or be redone. And frequently the answer is, like, this can just leave. This is just getting in the way of the process, and I can, just sort of patch over the hole that it's left, with something simple, right? With just a simple transition, instead of, there doesn't need to be a mechanic here at all or something, right? This just can just happen. But that's the sort of thing that playtesting will tell you. So I mean, like, the process is do good playtesting, record everything that you're playtesting, and figure out whether each individual piece of your game needs to be there.
And one more thing, so Moe, you want to go ahead? You go first.
Most of my experience was actually taking words out, because if I didn't refine the text, I was going to have to pay for another piece of art. So
Right. Yeah.
Layout will dictate a lot of that. But, I really fell in love with a build your own spell magic system that maybe Forged in the Dark hadn't really done before. And I really liked it. And, people who were running this game when I wasn't around kind of came back and said, look, can I just have a list of spells? They really wanted a pick list that was, a lot more story gamey and a lot less Champions hero gamey. So,
If I could add something else, sort of on the flip side of that, occasionally there would be a request, and I'd be like, I don't want to include that for reasons, but I've heard that several times. So, like, people were like, why aren't there sex moves? I'm like, because it's not a sex game. But, like, if you look in the variant rules chapter, I wound up writing some intimacy moves. Like this is what I would do, to evoke, like, if you wanted to have more of a focus on, like, the moment where someone lowers their last guard, like, with you. Like, that's the trigger, and then the question relates to the character's conflict. But I also write, like, this is how this will change the way the game feels. And, like, these are some pitfalls to avoid, right? Like, the end goal isn't sex or, like, this kind of intimacy. You're not, like, playing to a goal. It's not, like, a reward. We don't want to, like, mechanize this stuff too much. But, some people are going to enjoy it. And so there are some things that, either by request would be added or are features that I would take out. But if I thought there were people who would prefer to have it, I'd be like, here's why. Here's why the design is the way it is. Here's why that's not there. Here's what would change if you included it. And if you think that sounds great, then like here are the rules. Here are rules on more detailed PvP duels if you want to like actually go at each other instead of just crossing swords and flirting and like having insights about each other. Like, but that's going to change the focus of the game. So in that sense, I kind of got away with not removing those, but being transparent about sort of these are your options. I think hacking games is great and fun, and want to give people the insight and the tools to do it, and made a chapter for that.
It's always a fascinating editorial question how much of that goes into the actual product of the game and how much of that is like, you know what, this shouldn't even be in here at all, but if you wander by my website, there's a page that talks about this or something, right?
Right.
The different ways you can make that available to the audience and how much you make them go through to find it, right? It is an interesting editorial question for every game.
And I'll put forward that if you cut something, writing rarely goes bad.
Right.
And so if you have an idea and you cut it from this game, you may make a game with it, or that'll be your second game or become a part of a different thing. So just because you cut it doesn't mean you have killed it. You've just decided to go have it play in a different room.
Right.
So I think we have time for one more question, and then we'll kind of give our final, where you can find your stuff. So Stephanie, is there another question?
Dragontologist, is there any advice you might change for publishing a book of LARPs instead of tabletop?
Anyone gonna jump on that one, or?
My one attempt at making and selling a LARP product was unsuccessful, unfortunately. And so if other people have figured out precisely how they can, in fact, actually monetize LARP rules that are not connected to an organization, I would be delighted to hear it myself. Products that are made for LARPs tend not to be commercial ones, and so the commercial questions about that kind of like get taken out of the or the selling of the product is not the commercial portion of it, right? Like generally the successful LARPs are commercial in and of themselves as an enterprise, right? Like they're paid memberships to the LARP and that sort of thing. And so the product is being made without consideration for whether it will be a successful product standing on its own separate from the LARP. Efforts to, like I said, to make products that will generate their own LARPs are an entire kind of like separate question from that, and they tend to be on a pretty small scale, look pretty much just like doing indie RPGs, right? So,
April, you had a comment, or?
No, my video went out and then I waved hello when I got back. That's all.
Right, there you go.
Awesome. Okay, so I think we're.
Jason had a thought.
Oh, Jason, go ahead.
I'd say these books are very hard to sell. What Darren said,
Yeah.
I've had a very difficult time selling them. I was approached by a fairly large and well-funded LARPing group to consult with them on creating some LARP books that would be part of the package people buy when they buy to go do these kind of elaborate adventures. That it was going to be they wanted questions about printing and making deluxe versions that are packaged a certain way and stuff. So that might work. I mean, you could kind of sell them as a keepsake for people that are actually doing the LARP, but I don't think they stand alone as products on their own in a store necessarily.
Exactly. Yeah. And we've tried, and if somebody else figures out a way to do it, we'd be delighted to see it. But
please let us know.
Yeah, I'd love to be wrong.
Yeah, let us know if you can figure it out. So
yeah.
And I know a couple people who get paid for being professional LARPers in the corporate space.
Sure. Oh, there's LARP is monetizable a bunch of different ways. Making independent books for it is not the way to monetize it. So.
Okay, so with that, I think we're at 1 minute. So we're going to go around. Again, if you could just tell everyone where to find your stuff and how to find you and what's going on. April, would you like to go ahead?
All right, if you remember only one URL from where to find me, make it sword.gay. That is our Kickstarter. We're wrapping up this week, but we've already unlocked over 30 stretch goals and going strong. So if you like the sound of it, come check it out, download the trial copy, and play some Thirsty Sword Lesbians. Thanks.
Awesome. Jason, if you want to give your little spiel.
come check out many different role-playing game products at www.indiepressrevolution.com.
Awesome. Mo.
You can find me at ashyfeet.com. You can see some of my films. You can see some of my games. And I am sometimes on Twitter. I think I'll get back on Twitter now.
This is it. I have decided right now that this is
Like literally in 20 minutes I'll be over there. So let's go.
And Darren, if you want to give your
if you want to hire me individually as for a project, I am available at darren@exposure.com or darrenwatts@yahoo.com. And you can also check out my podcasts at explainthis.podbean.com.
Thank you. And my name is Jonathan. I've been your moderator. You can find me at firestorm-inc.com or firestorminc.itch or at Firestorm Inc. With a K. It's always a K. I thought it'd be great to have a pun for a name. It has caused me more trouble than I'd care to think about. And thank you very much for your time. Thank you for attending, and enjoy the rest of Metatopia.
Absolutely. Thanks for coming, everybody.